Hello and welcome. So, for anyone that is seeing my face for the first time, I am about to release, over the course of the next week, a Saw 7 rewrite that I have been working on for several years, off and on. The purpose of this video is to introduce that rewrite and kind of explain why I decided to start that in the first place. Basically, I want to talk about what it was I had hoped and in some cases expected to see from the conclusion to the original Saw series. And by extension, why I was so let down by what became Saw, the final chapter. But before getting started, I need to give a big shout out and thank you to Luke Headland. He has kindly allowed me to use his artwork for the thumbnails to these videos. The one for today's video is one that he designed as a Saw X fan poster. And as you can see, it is incredibly professional in quality. And that is consistently the case with Luke's art. I first discovered him and his work on the Saw subreddit a few years back when I was originally planning on releasing these videos. And since that time, he has continued to blow me away with more and more industry-level quality of work. In fact, I'd even go further than that and say that some of his posters I think are better than a lot of official posters for the same movies. I have included links to Luke's social media, including his Reddit and Twitter, and I highly encourage you guys to use those to check out some more of his work. And Luke, if you're watching, thank you again. I think a good place to start is as far as what I expected from the finale to this story. I wanted to experience a conclusion that gave a very real sense of everything coming together. I think generally speaking, that's what most people want from a conclusion to any story. But in the case of Saw specifically, the way the series progressed and became very episodic, each entry felt like you were getting more pieces to the bigger puzzle. Basically, from Saw 3 forward, every movie continued to recontextualize what came before. So I fully expected that Saw 7 would do the same, but to an even larger extent. In Saw 5, there's this line that John says to Hoffman in their final exchange, where he basically says that in the end, all the pieces will fit together and it'll become clear. And I always interpreted that line as being intended for the audience. To me, it was a promise that we were building towards a conclusion in which all the pieces would fit. And suddenly you'd have this clear picture of everything that we had been watching. Instead, Saw 3D didn't really revisit or recontextualize past events at all, with the one, I would argue, minor exception being Lawrence Gordon and what his fate was and what his involvement was in past events. When they first announced that Lawrence Gordon was coming back, I was so excited because a lot of people, myself included, had been wondering ever since the end of the first film what exactly happened to him. And part of why we were wondering that was because the films seemed to go out of their way to keep bringing him up. Then by the time you get to Saw 6, you see Jill leave a package for somebody that works in a hospital. And so, yeah, basically, by the end of Saw 6, it seemed apparent that not only was Gordon alive, but that he was, to some extent at least, involved in these Jigsaw games. I know I'm not the only one that had reached that conclusion. So I was excited when they announced that he was coming back, because not only would that plot thread finally be resolved, but I was very interested in seeing why would Gordon have agreed to help John in any way after what he went through in the first movie. Unfortunately, Saw the Final Chapter does not explore that at all. And even more unfortunately, Lawrence Gordon is barely even in the movie. He's in the opening scene, which honestly is like the one thing that I think is absolutely perfect about Saw the Final Chapter. In fact, that is the one thing that I kept the same in my Saw 7 rewrite. Basically, I open it with that exact sequence. Watching that in the theater for the first time, I watched like the first couple minutes and I was like, this is going to be awesome. But then Lawrence doesn't show up again until the group therapy scene, in which he delivers some very creepy dialogue, which just makes it even more obvious that he's a Jigsaw accomplice. And then he disappears again and doesn't show up until the very, very end, when finally they reveal that he has been involved in many of these games that we've seen over the past several films. And they treat that as not only the big reveal for the movie, but they treat it as the big reveal of the entire series. And while it was satisfying to get that confirmation, and it was satisfying to see that sequence, depicting the ways in which Gordon helped John. The problem was, me, and again, plenty of other people, had already pieced that together long before this movie came out. And what I wanted to see, and what I think we needed to see, was Lawrence's motives. Like, why would he agree? Like, what was it that happened immediately after the first Saw film that would have made him agreeable to this? And instead, what we see in Saw 3D is him just being real creepy. And yeah, we get nothing as far as what his level of investment is in the philosophy of Jigsaw. And that perfectly transitions into the other huge criticism I have of Saw 3D, and another thing that I really think we needed to see in the conclusion to this story, and that is a deeper exploration of the motives of the other accomplices. Starting with Hoffman, we see in Saw 5 that John had to kind of coerce Hoffman into this at first. And we see that when he helps abduct Paul, Hoffman sheds that tear. Like, he's showing genuine remorse for taking part in this. But something clearly happens between that and the events of the later Saw films, where Hoffman is not remorseful anymore, and he doesn't seem to be participating in the Jigsaw legacy simply because he's been blackmailed into it. Instead, he does seem to be embracing his participation in it. What I expected from Hoffman's story was to find out what exactly happened there. What was the shift in which he goes from being remorseful to being a cold-blooded, vicious killer. To a lesser extent, I would have liked a little bit more as far as Jill's motivations for helping John. We do get that one scene in Saw 6 where he initially comes to her and asks for her help, and it's clear that him using Amanda as proof that his methods work, it seems clear that that means something to Jill, that she seems to have spent many years trying to help Amanda with no success, and the fact that John was able to do it basically overnight, obviously that has an impact on Jill. But I still would have liked a little bit more clarification on where her head was at, as far as, all of the people that don't survive John's games how is she able to kind of sit with that, to live with that, I guess. And speaking of Amanda, Saw 6 gives us that bombshell revelation that I think was brilliant, that she was largely responsible for John and Jill losing Gideon, which of course was a huge part of why John became Jigsaw. And I left Saw 6, again, absolutely loving that reveal, but it had left in me an expectation that that would be further explored in Saw 7. I just really felt like we could have gotten more clarification on Amanda's overall arc and why she went down the path that she went down. And to what degree did Hoffman play a role in that? In Saw 6, we have that one amazing scene, again, in my opinion, of Hoffman and Amanda interacting. And like, to me, that was just so tantalizing. The idea of seeing what their relationship was like as accomplices to Jigsaw, as apprentices to Jigsaw, and seeing that hostility there. And that's something else I really wanted to see explored in the finale, as well as basically what were the relationships and dynamics like between each of these accomplices, and what were their relationships like with John himself. But not only do we not get those things, but Amanda is completely absent from the movie. And I think it's fair to say the biggest sin of Saw, the final chapter, is that Jigsaw himself is also barely in it. He's in it about as much as Lawrence is. You get him in the montage at the end, and you get the goofy as hell scene with him in the baseball cap, which is now infamous. And that's it. If the series were to keep going and you wanted to move on from that character, that's fine. But when he's been a big part of all of the previous films, and this is supposed to be the epic conclusion, he should have a much larger role, in my opinion. And considering the degree to which they feature him in the promotional materials, like he's in all, or at least most of the posters I remember from the movie. He's the first name credited in the movie, but again, hardly in it. Let me talk about thematically what I felt like was the conclusion we were building towards from the first 6 films, and what I felt like the ending of 6 really set up, and set up well. By the end of the 6th film, the central conflict of the entire series, as I saw it, had been boiled down to these two ideas of Jigsaw. There's the John Kramer version, and then there's the Mark Hoffman version. And basically, they represent conflicting ideas of justice. John Kramer believes that everybody deserves a chance at rehabilitation. He does what he does, and he inflicts the suffering that he inflicts, not because he enjoys seeing people in pain and in agony, but because he hopes that they can grow from that experience. Hoffman, on the other hand, has a much more cynical view of people, and he doesn't believe that people deserve a chance. And a lot of his games, especially as time goes on, he doesn't intend for them to survive. What Hoffman gets out of these traps, and how he views them, is as punishment and as retribution. He wants to torment these people for the sins they have committed. So again, these two conflicting ideas of what justice really looks like. On the one hand, you have rehabilitation. On the other hand, you have retribution. And as an extension of that is what I see as the religious allegory that the Saw series as a whole is. I actually did talk about this in one of my videos a couple years ago, and instead of repeating all of that and potentially forgetting something, I'm just going to insert a clip where I kind of illustrate what that allegory is as I see it. Now, before I start comparing John Kramer to God, I do feel the need to clarify something. I remember having a conversation with my brother in recent years about all of this, and I remember him saying to me that it kind of sounded like I was saying John was the good guy and he was right in everything that he was doing. And that's when I realized that I had been failing to make a very important distinction. I do believe that in the context of the story as a religious allegory. That is not the same thing as me saying that if somebody like John Kramer existed in the real world and did the things that he did, I would absolutely not consider them a good person or somebody to root for or believe in or anything like that. Nothing gives a human being the right to do those things to another human being, no matter how pure their motivation may or may not be. That said, again, in the context of the story, as a religious allegory, I absolutely do feel that John Kramer is the protagonist of this overall story. And I absolutely believe that he is a representation of God.
He can't hear you. He doesn't even know you're there.
He's this figure with these intricate, thought-out plans in which he insists that people make their own choices, while at the same time subjecting them to suffering that he hopes will improve them. Meanwhile, you have Hoffman, who starts out as an ally of John's, but eventually becomes essentially his nemesis because of his much more cynical view of humanity. Hoffman doesn't seem to believe that people can be redeemed, and that the people that they are testing do not deserve a chance, and instead deserve to suffer and die. And so when John chooses Amanda, one of these people that Hoffman views as unworthy, there's an envy there reminiscent of Lucifer's jealousy of humanity. And so then what does Hoffman do? In my mind, he immediately begins trying to corrupt Amanda and trying to prove to John that he's wrong about her, and by extension, everyone else.
Amanda will fail you. We'll see.
He tries to lead her astray and away from John's teachings, and he succeeds in convincing her to sin against him and ultimately deny him.
She hasn't changed because nobody fucking changes. Nobody is reborn. It's all bullshit. It's all a fucking lie. And I'm just a pawn in your stupid games.
Also, it may be worth pointing out that another part of this religious allegory is that John loses his only son. Now, before ending this video, I want to talk about a couple of the ideas that I liked on paper or in concept that Saw 3D kind of flirted with, but I think failed at in the actual execution for the most part. Some of these things remain in some form in my Saw 7 rewrites. Some of them don't. As I said before, the one thing that I kept exactly the same is the opening scene. I think that was the perfect way to open Saw 7. The next thing that I liked the idea of was the public trap. Again, looking at the story of Jigsaw as a religious allegory, I think it's clear that John wanted his philosophy to catch on and to spread, and so a natural progression of that would be that these would start to take place in public arenas. On paper, I also liked the idea of a Jigsaw target being someone that has been lying about being a Jigsaw survivor. Again, I don't like the way that that was incorporated into the film, specifically the fact that it had nothing to do with the other half of the movie. But the next thing that I really liked in concept was the group therapy of Jigsaw survivors. once again, if John wanted his philosophy to catch on and he wanted these people to be rehabilitated, it absolutely makes sense that he would want one of his apprentices, accomplices, whatever, successors, that he would want them to help or coach these people, these survivors, in how to respond to what they went through. And the fact that it would take place in a church, again, absolutely perfect, in my opinion. The idea that this is kind of becoming a religion. And the last thing that I could think of as far as like things I liked that Saw 3D tried to do was the way that it's revealed what Hoffman's plan was to infiltrate the police station right before we see it come to fruition. That scene of the body bag being unzipped right after we just learned what's in there, and then having him pop out and go on his killing spree, that worked for me. I'm going to eventually do a video on Saw 3D in its entirety and what all of my criticisms are. But okay, I think that's everything that I wanted to kind of cover in this introduction. The idea was that this would kind of set you guys up for what my Saw 7 rewrite is trying to accomplish, basically. You know, hopefully that gives you some idea of what to expect from my Saw 7 rewrite should you choose to read it, which I'm hoping, if you've been willing enough to watch this to this point, that you're at least willing to give it a shot, you know, to at least start it and see if you're into it or not. But basically, I'm going to release it in installments because the script itself is long. So yeah, I've broken it up into episodes basically to make it easier to read in individual sittings. And I'm going to release videos in which I will have those documents linked in each of the videos. And then those videos will kind of do a commentary of sorts, kind of where I will go into some of the specific scenes and talk about why I reached certain narrative conclusions that I reached based on the earlier 6 films. I hope you guys will find that interesting, but if you guys don't want to check that out, that's fine. I hope at the very least you'll try reading the script. I look forward to the idea of being able to discuss Saw in general, but specifically some of these ideas and how I think it should have ended, I guess. I did also want to add that along with the links to each of the script documents, I will also be providing a link to a character reference sheet. Basically, the purpose of this sheet is for anyone that is reading the script and they come upon a name that seems to be referencing a character that may have been in the previous films, and they're not quite sure who that is, they can just pull up this character sheet, find the name alphabetically as it's referred to in the script, and then if they click that name, it will pull up a page from the Saw Wiki describing who that character is. The handful of original characters that are in my script are also listed on this character reference sheet, but at the top. That way, if you read one of those names and you're not sure if it's somebody that's been in the series before, and you pull up the character sheet, you'll see at the top that they're a new character. And you don't have to worry about, okay, what happened with this character before. But okay, I hope you guys will come back for the next one, and I look forward to talking to you guys soon.
Hello there. If you'd like to be notified when more videos like this one arrive, just click the circle to subscribe. In the meantime, you can click either of the 2 boxes to check out other content from this channel. Or don't. The choice is yours.